Hey, I'm Patrick from Last Records, and today I'm diving into cases where Karens with an entitled mindset met their end doing stupid things. Something I honestly didn't think was possible until I looked into these cases. From a Karen who ignored professional advice just to put on a perfect moment, to a Karen who climbed over her neighbor's fence because the authorities wouldn't side with her and paid for it in the worst way possible. It was April 9th, 2016 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The backyard had been set up since mid-morning. Pastel balloons tied to the backs of folding chairs, a table with snacks and a decorated cake. And at the center of it, all a short section of PVC pipe mounted on a wooden base, loaded and ready. Ashley Monroe, 41, ran a parenting blog that she had been building for 4 years. She posted DIY projects, setups, family milestones, and the kind of carefully framed moments that looked effortless but took most of a Saturday to arrange. She had around 8,000 regular readers and a loyal following on social media. This was her third child, and she wanted the reveal to be the best one yet. Something dramatic, something her readers would share. She'd been planning it for 3 weeks, and everything was going to go exactly the way she had pictured it. And look, I get that. I genuinely do. When you have built an audience around your family's moments, the pressure to make each one bigger than the last is real, and she was very clear about that. By the morning of the party, Ashley wasn't just organizing, she was directing. She corrected how the chairs were spaced, adjusted decorations other people had already set. When a relative suggested a simpler option, Ashley shut it down immediately. She said she wasn't doing basic for something this important. She had found a tutorial online for a homemade confetti cannon made from PVC pipe. The basic version used a manual pump or a small balloon. Ashley had found a modified version in the comments that used a CO2 cartridge for a bigger, faster burst. Several people said it worked perfectly. A few said not to do it. Ashley didn't just scroll past the warnings. She dismissed them out loud, calling them overdramatic and saying people online love to exaggerate risks when they didn't know what they were doing. And before I continue, let me say this. Don't try everything you see online. It will save you a lot. Her husband was a mechanical engineer. When she showed him the design, he looked it over carefully and said he was not comfortable with it. He explained that consumer-grade PVC pipe was not designed to handle compressed gas, and that introducing a CO2 cartridge into a sealed section with glued joints could cause the pipe to fail under pressure. He told her she should use something made for the purpose. It would be safer, and it would still look good on camera. Ashley didn't take that as advice. She took it as pushback. She cut him off midway through his explanation and told him that plenty of people had used the exact same setup without any issues, and that she wasn't going to ruin the aesthetic with something bulky or store-bought. When he tried to explain further, she rolled her eyes and said not everything needed to turn into one of his technical lectures, especially over something this simple. He also told her again that it wasn't about opinion. It was about how the material behaved under pressure. Ashley responded by telling him he was overthinking it and making a problem where there wasn't one. She added that this was her event, her blog, and she knew what she was doing. She had spent 3 weeks planning this, and she was not changing it at the last minute because he was being cautious. This wasn't up for debate. She picked the device back up and said if he was not going to help, he could find somewhere else to be useful until the guests arrived. What gets me about that exchange is that he was a mechanical engineer. He was not guessing. He knew exactly what he was talking about, and she knew that. She just didn't want to hear it. He stood there for a moment longer, watching her. Then he stepped away. The pipe was standard, consumer-grade PVC intended for household plumbing. It was not rated for compressed gas under any conditions. The joints were bonded with standard PVC adhesive. There was no pressure gauge. There was no relief valve. Nothing to regulate or limit what happened inside the pipe once the cartridge released. The only thing standing between the stored energy and the backyard was the pipe wall and the glued connections holding it together. Guests gathered and the phones went up. Ashley positioned herself right beside the device, rather than stepping behind it, turning her body slightly toward the cameras so she would stay in frame. She reached for the trigger. There was no meaningful warning, nothing anyone could react to. She triggered the mechanism. Then this is when everything began to go wrong. The cartridge punctured and released rapidly into the sealed chamber, causing pressure to spike within a fraction of a second to a level the pipe was never built to survive. The glued joint near the base gave out first. The pipe shattered, sending rigid PVC shards outward at high velocity in every direction. Ashley was standing directly beside the failure point and slightly above it. A shard struck her in the face and head. The force of the fragmentation at that distance caused severe traumatic injury immediately. She collapsed as confetti dispersed around her. I have spent a lot of time with this case, and that last image is the one I cannot move past. Confetti in the air and Ashley on the ground. Guests called 911 immediately as people rushed to help and moved the children away. She was taken to a medical center, but despite surgery, she died from severe head trauma caused by high-velocity PVC shrapnel. Investigators examined the device and concluded the incident resulted from introducing unregulated compressed CO2 into a system built from non-pressure rated PVC materials with no pressure controls of any kind. The incident was ruled accidental. Now this next one, I actually had to stop researching it halfway through and come back to it the next day. Because unlike Ashley's story, this one did not start with a dangerous device or a technical miscalculation. It started with wind chimes, and somehow it ended exactly the same way. It was July 18th, 2015, in Henderson, Nevada. The desert evening had settled over the HOA community on Pinecrest Drive the way it always did in summer. The heat dropping slowly after sundown, and the air going still and quiet. In a neighborhood like this one, where the houses sat close together and the streets were empty by 9, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows each other. Deborah Klein, 53, had lived in the community for 7 years and had served as HOA treasurer for the last 4 of them. People who knew her described her as detail-oriented and committed to the rules that kept the community running the way it was supposed to. She attended every board meeting, filed every form correctly, and expected her neighbors to follow the same standards she held herself to. She was not the kind of person who let something slide. And I want to be fair to Deborah here, because on paper, none of that sounds unreasonable. The problem was what happened when the system told her no. The wind chimes had been hanging on her neighbor's back porch for years. They were not particularly loud. On most nights, you would not notice them unless you were standing right next to the fence. The other neighbors on the street had lived alongside them for years without a single complaint. But Deborah had decided she did not like them, and that was enough. She walked next door one evening and knocked. When her neighbor answered, Deborah told her the chimes needed to come down. Her neighbor said they had been there for years and asked politely what the problem was. Deborah's voice went up. She told her neighbor that the sound was disruptive and inconsiderate, and that a person who actually cared about the people around her would have taken them down already. Her neighbor tried to respond, but Deborah kept talking, her voice getting louder, her finger pointing toward the backyard. Her neighbor said she was not going to stand on her own porch and be spoken to that way, and closed the door. That's exactly what I would do if I was the neighbor. I won't watch you stand on my porch yell at me. Deborah stood there for a moment. Then she walked home and filed a formal HOA complaint the next morning, then a second, then a third. She wrote each one carefully, documented the dates and times she claimed to have been disturbed, and submitted them through the proper channels. Each one was reviewed. Each time the determination came back the same. The wind chimes did not meet the threshold for a noise violation under the community's governing documents. They were not loud enough. They were not frequent enough. The board could not take action. And this is where it starts to get uncomfortable, because most people accept that answer and move on. Deborah did not. The final rejection letter arrived on July 15th. Deborah read it twice and put it in her HOA folder. 3 days passed. The chimes were still there. Her neighbor had not spoken to her since the night she closed the door. The board had done nothing. Nobody was going to do anything. Deborah decided she would handle it herself. On the evening of July 18th, shortly after 11, Deborah walked to the back of her property carrying a small step stool. The fence between her yard and her neighbors was a standard 6-foot wooden privacy fence. She placed the stool against the base, climbed up, swung her leg over the top, and dropped down onto the other side. She landed awkwardly, her right wrist taking the full impact as she tried to catch herself. The pain was immediate. She left the yard without touching the chimes and drove herself to the emergency room at a hospital where she was treated for a hairline fracture of the wrist and discharged with a brace and instructions to rest it for at least a week. And what gets me is that at this point, she had a broken wrist. It should have been the moment she let it go. But guess what happened next? She was back at the fence the following night. The doctor had told her to rest the wrist and keep the brace on for at least a week. By the following evening, she had already decided it was not that bad. The chimes were still there. A sore wrist was not going to change any of that. She went slower this time, more careful at the top, more deliberate about how she was going to come down on the other side. What gets me is that she had thought it through, and this is what she came up with. The chimes were right there, maybe 8 feet away, hanging from a hook on the porch overhang. She got to the top of the fence and swung her leg over. Her foot reached for the ground on the other side. She misjudged the distance in the dark. Her foot came down short, and she lost her balance. Pitching forward with nothing to grab onto, she fell forward and down, and her head struck the decorative stone edging that ran along the base of her neighbor's garden bed. The stones were fixed in place and had no give. The impact was direct. She did not get up. She was found the following morning after she failed to respond to calls and a neighbor requested a welfare check. Officers and paramedics entered the yard and found Deborah on the ground near the fence line. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as traumatic brain injury sustained from the fall. She was 53 years old. Investigators determined the incident resulted from unauthorized entry onto private property during a second attempt to remove an object that had been the subject of a failed complaint process. And guess what? The wind chimes were still hanging on the neighbor's porch when officers arrived that morning. They were intact. They were undisturbed. In other cases I have covered, people made bad decisions in a single moment, and that was it. Deborah made a series of them over several days. This next one, though, Denise Halpern had one bad evening, and the thing that cost her was not a decision she made at home. It was a decision she made in a salon chair. It was June 11th, 2015, in Boca Raton, Florida. The afternoon shift at the salon on Palmetto Park Road was running the way it always did on a weekday. Every station occupied, dryers humming, conversations layered over each other across the room. The schedule was tight, and the staff had learned to move through it without much margin for anything unexpected. Denise Halpern, 55, was a real estate agent who had been selling properties in Boca for 12 years. She was good at her job, and she knew it. Colleagues described her as sharp, driven, and used to getting things done on her terms. That evening, she had one of the biggest open house showings of her quarter. A 4-bedroom waterfront property that had been sitting on the market for 2 months. She had spent the week preparing the listing, arranging staging furniture, and sending personal invitations to her top buyer contacts. First impressions mattered at a showing like this, and she intended to walk through that door, looking like someone who had everything under control. She had called ahead and booked a last-minute blowout, arriving at the salon at 4:10 in a cream blazer with her phone already in her hand and 45 minutes built into her schedule before she needed to leave. And look, I want to be clear about something. Denise was not an unreasonable person. She was under genuine pressure that evening. But then again, Karens don't know where to stop. The receptionist told her there was a 20-minute delay. The previous appointment had run over, and her stylist was finishing up. Denise did not sit down. She asked why a booked appointment was being pushed back for someone who had gone over their time. The receptionist explained that the previous client had arrived late and the schedule had shifted. Denise said that was not her problem. She had a showing at 7, and she had booked specifically to have enough time. The receptionist said the stylist would be with her as soon as possible. Denise asked to speak with the manager. The manager came out and offered the same explanation. Denise said she understood the explanation and did not find it acceptable. A stylist working the next station over offered a compromise, suggesting she could begin the blowout while finishing the last steps of her current client. Denise agreed, though she made clear she expected the full service and expected it done properly. The blowout began. Within a few minutes, Denise was directing the process. She told the stylist the sectioning was wrong. She said the dryer felt too cold and was taking too long. The stylist explained the heat setting and said increasing it further risked damaging the hair. Denise said she had been getting blowouts for 20 years and she knew what her hair could handle. She reached up and adjusted the dryer controls herself, pushing the heat higher. The stylist moved her hand away from the controls and reset them. Denise adjusted them again. The stylist stopped working for a moment and said calmly that if the settings were changed again, she would not be able to continue the service safely. Denise told her to keep going. This is the part of the story I find hardest to sit with. Because the stylist tried, she said the words out loud, and Denise heard them and kept going anyway. Because of the constant adjustments and interruptions, the stylist had to reposition her setup to keep working, running a temporary extension cord from a nearby station. It passed behind the chair, close to where Denise had been shifting throughout the appointment. It was not part of the usual setup, but it allowed the service to continue under the conditions Denise insisted on. Denise's phone rang. She answered it and stepped back from the chair while talking, still complaining about the delay. She was moving without looking, distracted and mid-conversation. Her heel caught the extension cord. She lurched backward and reached for the chair, but missed. There was no break in the fall. Her full weight carried straight back, and the back of her head struck the lower metal frame behind her. The sound cut through the noise of the salon. What gets me about that moment is how fast it was. Staff called 911 immediately. Denise was conscious, but disoriented when paramedics arrived. Imaging confirmed a severe traumatic brain injury from the direct impact. She was admitted to intensive care and died 3 days later without regaining full consciousness. Unfortunately, she never made it to the house showing. Investigators classified the incident as an accidental fall involving environmental obstruction and active client interference during the service. The incident was ruled accidental. And then there is Sharon Whitaker. And I spent a long time figuring out how to talk about this one, because on the surface, it sounds almost too simple. But Sharon was the kind of person who could not walk away from something she felt was wrong. And that evening, that quality cost her everything. It was March 6th, 2015, in Beaver Creek, Ohio. The afternoon shift at the grocery store on Fairfield Road was winding down the way it always did at that hour. The checkout lanes thinning out, the overhead lights humming over empty conveyor belts. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing was supposed to happen. Sharon Whitaker, 54, was a substitute teacher at an elementary school in the district. Friends and colleagues described her as someone who did not let things go. She was the kind of person who read the fine print, kept her receipts, and followed up on every complaint she ever filed. She was organized, and she was persistent, and she believed strongly that if something was wrong, it was worth saying so. That afternoon, she had driven to the store to pick up supplies for her daughter's birthday party the following weekend. Her daughter was turning 9, and Sharon had been planning the party for 2 weeks. She had a list, balloons in the colors her daughter had asked for, a chocolate cake mix, and the frosting to go with it, paper plates and napkins, and a bag of candy for the party games. She had worked it all out, and she knew roughly what it was going to cost. And look, this is just a mom trying to give her daughter a good birthday. That is the full context of why she was in that store. A few weeks earlier, she had clipped a coupon from the Sunday Circular. It was for a few dollars off a grocery purchase over a certain amount, and she had held on to it in the small zippered pocket of her purse specifically for this trip. She was not going to pay full price when she had a coupon. That was not how Sharon Whitaker did things. She loaded her items onto the belt, set her purse on the small ledge at the end of the register, and placed the coupon face up next to her loyalty card. The cashier picked it up, scanned it, and set it back down on the belt. The coupon had expired 3 weeks earlier. Sharon looked at it. She told the cashier that she had clipped it recently and that the store should honor it. The cashier explained that the system would not accept an expired coupon and that there was nothing she could do. Sharon asked for a manager. The cashier called for one over the intercom. While they waited, Sharon told the cashier that a little flexibility would go a long way, and that this was exactly the kind of thing that made people stop shopping at certain stores. The cashier kept her eyes on the register, and this is the part where I keep thinking, just leave the items, just walk out. But that was not Sharon. The manager arrived a few minutes later. He was a man in his early 30s with a store lanyard and a patient expression that Sharon apparently did not find reassuring. He looked at the coupon. He confirmed it was expired. Sharon said the expiration date was printed so small that a person would need a magnifying glass to read it, and that this was a store problem, not a customer problem. She told him she had been shopping at this location for 11 years. She told him she spent a significant amount of money there every month. He offered her a small discount on a future purchase as a goodwill gesture. Sharon said that was not the same as honoring the coupon, and she did not accept it. She asked for the name of the shift supervisor. The manager stepped away from the register to make a phone call. Several minutes passed. The customers who had been waiting behind Sharon had quietly moved to other lanes. She remained where she was. When the manager came back, the answer was the same. The coupon could not be accepted. Sharon took a pen from her purse and wrote the supervisor's name on the back of the coupon. She told the manager that corporate would be hearing from her. She left her items on the belt and walked toward the exit. On her way out, she told the cashier that some people had no business working with the public. The entrance to the store had been mopped as part of routine floor cleaning during the late afternoon lull. A yellow wet floor sign had been placed in the center of the walkway, just inside the sliding doors. Sharon had walked straight through it on her way out, kicking it aside with her foot without slowing down, muttering that it was in the way. The sign tipped and came to rest at an angle near the edge of the mat. The floor was still wet. The sign was no longer centered in the walkway. What gets me is that she had already won the argument in her head before she even reached the door. She was done. She was leaving. And then something made her turn around. Sharon came back through the sliding doors just as immediately as she left. She had thought of something else she wanted to say. She came in fast, already talking, her eyes on the register at the far end of the lane. Her left foot came down on the damp tile just past the entrance mat. The sole of her shoe found no grip on the wet surface. Her foot went forward and her body went straight back. She had no time to react and nothing to grab onto. The back of her head struck the tile floor directly. The sound carried to the nearest checkout lane. She did not move after that. Staff called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Sharon unresponsive near the entrance. She was transported to a medical center where imaging confirmed a severe traumatic brain injury from the impact. She was admitted to intensive care. Sharon Whitaker died 2 days later without regaining consciousness. Her daughter's birthday party was never held that weekend. Investigators classified the incident as an accidental fall involving a displaced safety warning in a recently cleaned area. The incident was determined to be accidental,